Great, well, let's get started. Tenekoto katoa. Thank you for joining us today for this important webinar with MPI. We're really excited to have all of you here to listen to Susanna Barris, the manager for regulatory development, and Meredith Elley, the project manager for organics. And they're here to provide us with an update on the development of the national standard. Letting more people in. So as you know, on the 30th of March, 2023, Parliament passed the Organic Products and Production Act, and that legislation aims to harmonize and enforce organic standards across the country, and it essentially declares that a national organic standard will be created. And the need for this law is driven by the growing demand for organic products, both domestically and across the world. I cannot overstate this demand enough, right? The demand for organic products will continue to increase as more and more consumers seek safe, healthy food, high nutrient density foods, foods that meet high animal welfare standards, that regenerate our land, our waterways, that help mitigate climate change, and they'll help build resilience in agricultural systems. So basically, as consumers' value become more aligned with the values and principles of organic farming, we're going to see continued demand in organics. And the sector lobbied for over a decade for the development of a national standard. And as you recall, many of you have been involved in the many consultations and submissions over the years on this. OANS has led the sector level response to aggregate what we call a unified response, and has repeatedly met with various government officials to make sure that the government understands what and why we ask for our, and why we ask for the things that we do, basically. And I'm very happy with how our industry government relationships have developed, and I'm happy with the level of cooperation that we have reached now with MPI, and I look forward to increasing cooperation even further as we move through what we call this policy journey. So developing relationships, I know it's really difficult, speaking the same language, getting on the same page. It really takes time and persistence on both sides, and I would say both sides have made significant strides recently, and I cannot thank everyone enough that has been involved in this work. In particular, I know I want to thank Matt Gallagher from Assure Quality and Donald Nording from BioGrow, who have given significant time to the standard development. I mean, they have gone way above and beyond, working with MPI and taking time, significant time and resources from their businesses. And I want to acknowledge their hard work for us as a sector. I also want to acknowledge members of the OAN's technical team, Jenny Lutz from Soil and Health, Matt and Donald, as before, Jem Bennett from Organic Farm and Zed, Joanna Turner from Biodynamics New Zealand, and of course, the technical working group convener, Derek Broadmoor, who has been instrumental in building bridges with MPI. He has led all the work that we've had on our submissions. He's just volunteered tirelessly for the betterment of the sector on the bill and the standard, and I can't thank him enough for all of his hard work as well. And I also want to recognize the members of the Organic Sector Advisory Committee, which is called OSEC for short. So this group was established to help guide MPI through the standards development process. And its membership consists of one representative from various organic organizations from across the sector. So OAN's played a role in helping to drive this committee's formation with MPI in the early stages, just to ensure that more sector voices and leadership roles were available to MPI to assist and weigh in on issues surrounding the development of the standard. The standards development is one of the most important things that we're here to discuss today. I also have to commend the MPI Organics team for the amazing amount of work they're putting in to accomplish the standard. Developing government policy, and particularly in a dynamic and as diverse of a sector as organics is it presents a lot of challenges, and I'm really just so thrilled at how hard everyone in the MPI Organics team is working for us. Um, it's not easy. You have to balance, diverse stakeholder interests. That's pan agriculture, which is something that's just so unique about the organic sector. And at the same time, you've got to create a really robust framework for the domestic sector, something that works for us in New Zealand, but also aligns with international standards so that we can consistently, keep trading and keep having the market access that we need. And these are all pretty complex tasks in their own right, individually, and to combine them all is pretty hard. And I really, really want to shout out to MPI and all the awesome work that they're doing to help us. Because despite the challenges, that we've made a lot of great strides collaborating between OANs and the technical working group, OSAC, and myself sort of representing OANs as the leading umbrella organization for the sector. And that ongoing collaboration is going to be absolutely key to the success of this new organic regime. And I'm very excited to keep working with MPI on this. So today's webinar is an opportunity to update you on the standard progress and discuss a little bit about the path ahead. It's also a chance for you to meet Meredith. Many of you may not have met her yet. She's a new recruit. And many of you have met Susanna, so this is a good opportunity to reconnect or possibly meet both of them at the same time right now. If you haven't been involved in past webinars, this is a great opportunity for you to learn straight from MPI. So following the presentation, we'll have a question and answer session, like a Q&A. You can please use the chat function to ask questions, and I'll be helping to monitor these questions. And Meredith and Susanna, you can jump in if you're like, I know the answer to that question. But the goal is to give Meredith and Susanna an opportunity to present and then follow up with a Q&A. And I really encourage everybody to take this opportunity to ask questions, to share your perspectives in the chat. There's so many of us online, we can't all just start talking. So we'll endeavor to try to answer all of your questions. And if we don't get to your question, it's really burning, we don't have an answer, it hasn't been answered in the previous question, please let me know. My email is tiffany@oans.org. I'm happy to follow up with MPI to try to get answers for you. And I want to say before we get started too, that this engagement opportunity is really about collaboration. So please don't get frustrated if your question, the answer to your question is currently under legal privilege, or if we just don't know the answer, if MPI doesn't know the answer, or I don't know the answer. Please understand that this standard development is a work in progress. Today is about giving a snapshot, an exciting opportunity to say, here's where we've come from, here's where we are, and here's where we need to go. It's all about the journey, and we will get to that final destination, but we've got lots of work to do to get there. And this is about being transparent and collaborative and understanding how we get from A to B. So I'm pleased to introduce our esteemed speakers from MPI, Meredith Elley and Susanna Barris. I'll leave it to you guys. Let's get started.
Oh, kia ora. Thanks, Tiffany. That's awesome. Susie, you there? Where I can't. That's possibly maybe I can't see you, but hopefully you are there.
I am here. I can see you, but
look at you.
Yeah, can you see me?
Do you start?
Yep, we can see you.
Gone.
We got you.
You got me? Okay.
Yep.
So, are you going to share screen?
I will. Yes.
And I can't see myself, so I'm not.
You're both fine. I have to apologize. We use Zoom, and I know the government uses Teams, and it's always a challenge to get you to switch to come onto
It's a little
the
bit
Zoom
of
world.
education. No, I'm comfortable on Zoom, but I just usually can see myself, but I'm not. It could be just the view.
Shared. Yes.
There you go. We can see it
like that. Yeah. Okay,
Boom.
there we go. Okay, I'll kick off. I'm Susanna Barris. I'm the Manager Regulatory Development at New Zealand Food Safety. So we are part of MPI, and our area, or we've recently actually gone through a bit of a restructure. So if I stumble a little bit through this bit, it's just because there's been some recent change, but and it's made us a bigger team at New Zealand Food Safety. We're now called Food Risk Management, and the Food Risk Management Directorate takes in both the standards development area of New Zealand Food Safety, and also the sort of compliance and response area as well. So it's a broad church, and we do a number of things, but our area is to that sort of standards development area, and that's why this project around organics has landed in our space, because it's a lot to do with setting up that national organic standard, and then implementation, which is also part of what we do. But just we are working with a broad number of people across MPI, because this system hits a number of areas, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into the presentation. But just to give you a little bit of my background, I started with MPI's sort of predecessor organisations about 22 years ago. So I've got 20 plus years experience in this area, mostly in food safety, although I had a little bit of time in the operational programs area of MPI, which was about helping sort of all of those operational areas of MPI across fisheries, biosecurity and food safety to do things better. So I did that for a couple of years, but most of my time has been spent in food safety, and for a lot of that period of time on implementation of the Food Act, a good 10 years of that. So I have got quite a bit of experience in working through the development and implementation of new legislation. And this this project, I think, is following a familiar track for me. And from an organics perspective, part of one of my previous roles was for a relatively short period of time, but a good probably a year or just over a year, managing the plant wine, what is the plant wine and organics team now. So that was my introduction to really the organic standards, because they obviously administer the Organic Official Assurance Program. So that gives you a bit of an idea of where I come from and what my experience is. I wonder, Meredith, should we introduce you first before we crack into the first slide?
Sure thing, sounds good. Kia ora koutou, ko Meredith Elley toko ingoa. So as Sue said, I'm working with her as project manager for the organics project. I joined the team February of this year. And so obviously there's been a huge amount of mahi that has happened prior to me coming on board, and do just want to acknowledge all the amazing work of Tina. So it's she's set it up. So I've sort of picked up the reins. I've worked with MPI for 4 years. So I did 3 years in biosecurity, leading out the government industry agreement program, which was all around better biosecurity outcomes for the Crown and industry. I moved across to New Zealand Food Safety and did a year there setting up the stakeholder engagement function. Did a brief stint as program manager at MB on the industry transformation plans, and then have come back to MPI and food safety on this project. So I guess I've been here, and yeah, very much a vertical learning curve, but yeah, getting my head around all of those things. Susan, I'll touch on this, but there is a big team that sits behind Susan and I, so it is just the two of us here today, but not to acknowledge that there's a whole lot of people that have done a huge amount of mahi in there. But thanks, great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity, Tiff, really appreciate it. And back to you, Suze.
Right. Okay. So do we want to go to the first slide then? This just gives you a bit of an idea of what we're going to cover. So we're going to talk first about the overview of the new regime. And Tiff has given introduction to that already. So that's just about why we're here, why we're doing this. Then we'll talk a little bit, I'll give a bit of a recap on the process so far. So that's sort of what is the, particularly in that sort of regulation development area, I'll talk a bit about that. And then Meredith's going to talk a bit about the regulation and supplementary notice development in the EU side by side. And then I will come back and talk a little bit more about our future work streams.
And I will just say, I think I've broken every one of the PowerPoint rules in putting this presentation together. But I figured in this case, because it has been a wee while and probably less is not more. So they are detailed, but we will talk through them all. But I just thought it would help for those that want to read and then listen as well. So, Suze.
Right. Thanks, Meredith. So this slide is just a little bit of the background as to what brings us here. So we all know that the Organic Products and Production Act received royal assent and became law on April the 5th last year, which was great. And the purpose of that act, well, this act is to increase consumer confidence in buying products labelled organic, increasing certainty for businesses claiming products as organic and facilitating international trade in organic products. So the regime basically sets out requirements for businesses involved in the organic sector, and that's from production through to sale. And Meredith's going to talk shortly about, I suppose, the sectors or that we're dealing with this particular project, because it's not all organic product. Basically the National Organic Standard and Process Regulations are under development, and you're going to hear a little bit more about progress on that today. And this is a bit of an important point that, so once that the organic standard is promulgated, so we're going to talk a bit about when that, we're hoping that is going to happen this year, and the products that those standards are restricted by, there'll be a 3-year period for people to move into the new system before it becomes mandatory. So we'll talk a little bit today about into place over the next few years for organic producers to be able to basically operate within the regime. And just to note there that we're talking mostly today about the National Organic Standard and the process regulations, but there is still some more work to be done in that regulation space. So we'll have some cost recovery there that's needed to service the regime. There's a national mark to be developed, which is really important to the sector, we know, and the in phase of the regime, there's still some regulation development to be done there. So once we've got these really important pieces done and promulgated, we will move on to those next areas. Right. So this just gives you a bit of it's almost like a bit of a recap of where this all once all of that hard mahi around the actual bill and act was done, and we moved into development of the regulations. This is actually what got us to where we are today. So you'll hopefully recall, I see a lot of familiar names in this webinar, but we had a number of technical workshops on the National Organic Standard in the second half of 2022. So I think there was 80 workshops all up, and some of those were face-to-face, and then a lot of them were online as well. So that sort of gave us a lot of the data or the information to help draft up the National Organic Standard proposals. At that same time, our policy colleagues were re-engaging with the sector on the process regulation proposals. So they'd already been out and discussed those, but they came back and re-engaged on them. So that was sort of, I suppose, post some of the work being done around COVID. And there was that slight slowdown around there. So they came in and did a bit more work on that. And then in April of 2023, last year, so Cabinet agreed to those process regulation proposals. And I've just put a link to the Cabinet paper there. If we sort of share these out later, Tiff, I was thinking that people could link directly through to that, but that links through to our website, and it shows those, it gives basically what the policy proposals were and what was agreed by Cabinet. So then the next step from there is the drafting of the regulations. At that same time, Cabinet agreed to us going out to consult on the National Organic Standard proposals. So we went out, and a lot of you were involved in that part of the process, because we went out, I think, for 6 weeks, and then we pushed that out for a bit longer to get everybody's feedback in. So that was that took us through to September 2023, where Cabinet agreed to the National Organic Standard regulations proposals. And again, there I've put the link to that Cabinet paper and the appendix. And basically from that time, the Minister or Cabinet basically instructs the Parliamentary Council Office to draft regulations. But what they need from us is some drafting instructions. So we work with our legal team from there on drafting instructions that then go through to the Parliamentary Council Office, and they draft the regulations. So just from a timeline perspective, I have added in there that the general election sort of happened around, as we know, in October last year. Just before that, it's quite a busy time. So it probably, the process regulations, although they were sitting with PCO at that time, they weren't really prioritised before the election. So really, we saw those being prioritised by PCO after the election. So around November is when the Parliamentary Council Office started drafting those process regulations. And then they started looking at, so from September till sort of towards Christmas time, we were working on drafting instructions for Parliamentary Council Office, and we passed those over to Parliamentary Council Office in February this year. But it is, I want to reiterate that it's a very iterative process. So although that might have been the first stage, the first set of instructions that we're going across, really that process just continues, and we continue to pass across drafting instructions, and drafts come back from them forwards. But Meredith's going to elaborate a little bit more on what's been happening as part of that process.
Thanks, Suze. Georgia, see, you've got your hand up. Is that on purpose? Have you got a great question for us? You're gonna... Starting soon? No? Okay, that's cool. I just didn't want to leave you hanging if you did have a burning question that you wanted to put out there. So thanks, Suze. So, you know, as Suze said, so once the green light for Parliamentary Council Office to start working on that, it really has been full steam ahead for the team to create that. So sort of since I started in February, there's been at least 20 people from or across PCO, and then largely MPI working on this, on getting these regs developed. So obviously there's a team at the Parliamentary Council Office who, are critical and to this. We have our MPI legal team, we've got our MPI policy team, we've got our MPI market access team, who are all have all been feeding in varying degrees, and then we've got sort of some technical expertise within New Zealand food safety, food reg, obviously, systems audit, approvals, PWO, so plant, wine and organics team, and then animal products team as well. The standards themselves, and this, none of this is, I don't think is deviated from when it went to consultation, but the standard regs themselves, very much the technical regulation, the general part, which is very much the legalese, and how that's coming together, but then a section on plants, wild harvest, aquaculture, livestock, apiary and processed products. So they're all coming together. Aquaculture is underway and has been formed, but we're just getting a little bit more review of the aquaculture standard regulations happening at the moment. Process regs are very much around how the new regime will work. So the sections, approvals and other requirements and how that comes together. Recognised entities obviously is a really big part of this new regime, and how that will work compared to the voluntary standard. Provisions for applying for both approval and recognition. There's the verification, the public register and the operator information and records that need to be kept. Cost recovery, enforcement and exemptions are obviously going to be key parts of this regime, but they're not going to be, we'll talk about that in due course on that one. So as Sue's alluded, what we've sort of been doing for the last, six months, it's not quite that long, certainly 5 months, is there's a process. So a technical team work on pulling together the regulations themselves. They go to our MPI legal team, who have to make sure that they're enabled through the Act and that they can be worked. That then goes across to PCO. PCO do a whole lot of drafting. That comes back to our legal team. The legal team have to review what PCO have created and make sure it matches the drafting instructions that went across. And then it comes back to us with a whole lot of, often, questions, clarification, and so the team, there's sort of this cyclical process that we're working through, that it's been a very big machine and hamster wheel probably for the last 4 or 5 months on the standard and the process regs. And a lot of it is getting, making sure that our legal team understand the requirements in the livestock space and some of the nuances that sit in there, and some back and forth and debate around how those are all coming together. So those are all now really in a good place. I've got a timeline that I can show you shortly. OSAC, so the Organic Sector Advisory Council, have provided some feedback on the early draft regulations as well. So we've done a little bit of testing there. And we were also lucky enough to have some input from the OAN's technical working group, specifically on the notice content. But of course, with notice content, they sort of need to understand how the regs are coming together as well. So that's been invaluable having that input there. We had hoped to get public consultation out in the next couple of weeks, but we've just had some advice from legal that we just need to amend a couple of things. So aiming for early August for public consultation on the notice content. And then I'll talk in a minute about some of the different processes that are working, but all things being equal, we're hoping to promulgate the National Organic Standard and the Organic Process Regulations late April 2024. So those are from a project perspective, those are the timeframes that we're working through the Cabinet process that will need to happen there.
Sorry, just a quick question, Meredith. You said late April 2024. Yeah. Do you mean?
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Late end. Sorry, the end of 2024. Thank you. Key to yeah. Not sure where the April came from. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, so that there's a huge amount of work that needs to happen just to get these regulations developed and up and running, and making sure that they're that they've captured all of the things that they need to capture. In addition to that, there is the EU side-by-side negotiation process that's running at the same time. So and that's certainly one thing that the project team are very focused on, is making sure that we're in a position to be able to negotiate a new treaty level equivalency arrangement with the EU. And so the EU have stipulated that that needs to be in place by 1 January 2027, which feels like a really long way away. It's not. So hence the kind of the time pressure. So the agreement obviously will recognise New Zealand and EU organic production and control rules as equivalent. And so what that will do is make sure that we can maintain market access for New Zealand organic products into the EU. The alternative is that any organic products exported to the EU would then have to meet all of the EU rules, organic rules, at the same time complying with all of the New Zealand standards for other markets. So really important that we get this landed. So the EU have said that they need it. They need by the end of this year, because they need 2 years over their side. So they need 2025 and 2026 to work through and ratify at their side. So hence the time pressure for us is really about this end of year to get that across to them and starting that negotiation process. So we had a couple of our key market access people were in market recently, meeting with the DG Agri. So that's the key content point from the EU Commission's perspective. So they are responsible for the policies on agricultural, rural development, and just common organic agricultural policy. So up in market, just signalling that New Zealand is still very much wanting to get this negotiated, that we are on track to provide the information that they need in the timeframe that they need it. So that there's a strong connection with what we're doing here in New Zealand, and then up through our Brussels team and into the EU. So one of the things that we agreed with the EU through that process is that we would provide the information in 2 tranches. So again, I'm not sure how familiar anyone is with the process for negotiation, but essentially the EU have provided us with 31 different Excel spreadsheets, which contain all of their text from the EU organic legislation. To put it in context, so there's 31 different sheets, Excel spreadsheets, and across those, there's 2,500 rows of information that we are working through. So the 2,500 rows are ostensibly all of the EU requirements. And what we've done is stood up a team that is going to manage that, assess that equivalency to put us in that negotiating position. So we've got an assessment team who will be looking at all of the EU regulations, looking at all of the New Zealand regulations and matching them up, and then making an assessment as to whether or not we are equivalent. And that may be yes or no, and if it's no, then providing rationale for why not and how our system differs from theirs. So that's underway at the moment. There's a team that are running through that assessment process. It's a pretty monster task. Then we undertake a review. So we use our internal experts and SMEs in that space, particularly with that market access understanding, and they're largely currently working across the OOAP. And they will do a review and assessment process. And then the next step there is that we start working with our market access team and start having group discussions to really land that position for New Zealand and that negotiating piece that we'll be going into. So huge amount of work for us still to work through there, but that's on track. What we've said to the EU, so we've sent one tranche of what we're calling tranches. So we've sent one a small group of information, some of these EU sheets up to the EU. We did that in June. and that was very much to start the process, test how it was going to work between the two parties. They are on summer break at the moment, so we anticipate the first conversations happening. Look, I'd be lying if I gave you an exact date, but I'd say probably early August is when we anticipate that. And then the rest of the sheets will be going up early September. So in that September window, that will give the EU a chance to work through all of those, and then there'll be those formal discussions further down the track. So that is a big part of the work program. So is anything to add there?
No, I think you've covered that well.
Okay, so this just gives you a bit of a sense of time and phasing. You may have seen this table before in a presentation that Tina may have done previously, but the first section there is really around the process regs. So they are divided into two. Advice from PCO is that so we had initially thought that the regulations might all come together as one, but actually advice from PCO based on what the Act says is that there will be two distinct sets of regulations. So the process regulations, obviously drafting is complete, and we are 95% there on the process regs. There's still a few pieces that we are working through, but those are days/a week away. Because obviously we need those landed to help with that EU side-by-side piece. As I mentioned, that notice content is being furiously created in the background as well. So we're about 75. These numbers are probably at the more conservative end, but 75% of that notice content has been created. And then you'll see, as I mentioned, public consultation aiming for August. And then National Organic Standard. So again, regs are largely complete. There is still some work to do on aquaculture. And then notice content is a bit, because the standard regulations were finalised a little bit earlier than the process regulations. We've been able to push forward on that notice content before then. And then the EU side-by-side. So whilst we've only sent over a small portion of those sheets, the other sheets are well underway and on track for that piece there. Those future work streams.
Yes, so I mentioned earlier that in the coming months, as the work on the National Organic Standard in the process regs starts to sort of work its way down, then we will stand up some of those other areas that do need to be worked on. So we've got around the regulation development area that's still required. We do have cost recovery, the national mark, and enforcement, and then we also will have a work stream that looks that works through all of those things that are needed to implement the various pieces of legislation. The MPI cost recovery team, so we did start this work probably towards the end of last year. We started to look at what this would look like for the sector, but the advice that we had from our cost recovery team when they sort of started delving into the detail is that we would need the process and the standards regulations and the notices promulgated before we come out to the sector with a discussion document on what those charges would be. And that really is because we need the services or the things that will be delivered, that levies will be based on, is based on that standard, on those processes that are sort of housed within the regulations and notices. So we need the sector to be able to refer to those things when they're considering the costs associated with that. So there has been, so there's a reasonable amount of work that's already been done on that, and we would look to fairly quickly kick that off once the standards and the process regulations are out there in the public So that's another trip to Cabinet to get them to sign off on that, and consultation on, at least on the cost recovery area, would be, we're looking at early 2025. I've also just added in there a link to organic news. Now, anything we're doing in this space, we try to keep the sector as up to date as we can through that organic news newsletter. You need to subscribe to it if you haven't already, and the link to the subscribe is on that organic news page. It also has links to all of these critical documents, all the cabinet papers, all of those things that I've shared through the presentation. You'll find links to those within the sort of the newsletters that we've published between, I suppose, the middle of last year and now. Yeah, do you want to share the next screen, Meredith? Because this sort of shows the work that we still have to do. So we just to take you through this is sort of more of a longer term project view. So we've got at the top there, you'll see the development that of the process regulations, the National Organic Standard regulations and notices. That's sort of that top line there, taking us through towards the end of this year. Other things that we need to consider is our technology, in-house technology. So we need our technology solution, our registration solution, to be able to register recognised entities and persons and operators. So we're quite the ways through that now, particularly for that registration system. Things that we need to, and we've started to consider things like the inputs register and some of the sort of performance monitoring and reporting capability that we need in-house. We do have a number of these things for our food safety systems. So it's a matter of, I suppose, tweaking or enabling this regime within those current technology solutions. So we're not talking about anything new here. It's actually reusing what we already have. Implementation activities. So that talks about in their processes and materials for registration of recognised entities and persons and operators. So creating all the material, all of the sort of application forms and those types of things to get people into the system. And then it also talks in there about the national mark, templates and guidance, cost recovery. So talked a little bit about we will be looking at regulation development for the end of this year, and it sort of projects when fees, charges and levies would start to be collected, and with full cost recovery sort of aiming for 2028. National mark infringement and enforcement system, regulation development there, and then looking at appointment of organic product officers towards the end of that 3-year transition period. Again, the EU negotiation timeline that Meredith has talked about a bit, and the EU parliamentary process, which negotiations take us to the end of this year, early next, and then the EU processes need to happen over that next couple of years. You'll see there that we've actually got a line for mandatory compliance with EU. So we're still working through what that looks like, because we've talked about with the sector that there'll be a 3-year transition, but obviously for those businesses that are exporting to the EU, they're not going to get that full 3 years, because they need to be compliant by or exporting under the standard by early 2027. So we're looking at what that means for that group of businesses that sort of fall into that category. So that's going to look slightly different. And and then moving recognised entities and persons into the system, looking at that being sort of a first cab off the rank, because we need those recognised entities in the system and recognised so that operators can take those, so that they can oversee sort of the operators' implementation into the system. So they're sort of like a first cab off the rank, really. And then we would look to move the operators in, starting with, like, as I said, those operators that are exporting to the EU, and then moving on to operators that are either in the domestic, operating in the domestic environment, or to other markets.
Thanks, Suze. And just a note on the cost recovery timeframe. So the reason that the light shading is there sort of from mid-2025, all of this still has to be worked through. So as Suze said, there's still a whole lot of work. This is just to give you some vague ideas of how things are coming together. Do not hold us to those, please. So there's still a whole lot of work to do in this next tranche of figuring out what that looks like. There's still, as Sue said, there's work that's been done on developing some early thinking on the regulations for cost recovery, but there's still some more work to do there. And then, of course, that public consultation. So that's why that shading there is light, because it really doesn't, we don't know yet when that's going to come into force.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Meredith, for that really great overview of where we are with the standard development and what's to come. There's obviously a lot of work to do. There's a lot of sector involvement that's going to be coming down the pipeline, and it's great to hear all the good work that you're doing and sort of get things around in our head of what we need to be thinking about as coming down the pipeline. We have quite a few questions. I know we don't have a ton of time left. Jem Bennett had mentioned perhaps giving some specific mention to the group scheme package. Could you explain that a bit?
Yes, I mean, I'm happy to, and we've got Jim on the line, and he's been involved particularly through discussions with organic farms and with others around how group schemes could work. So they're definitely part of the system and what we're considering. So I would encourage you to have a read of what we proposed in the cabinet paper, and I don't think it really has at all deviated from that. So there will be scope for groups, and they basically, it will be all the things that we talk about for a standard sort of operator. So they will require an OMP. We talk about them also requiring a group operating plan. So that's basically will set out how they operate as a group. So it will be some that will set out their systems and processes for ensuring that if they're undertaking peer review, that they have the competencies within the group to do that. It will set out how they actually go about scheduling those, so that and how they manage things like conflicts of interest and independence, all of those things that we expect to see sort of in a quality system. So it sort of follows that sort of quality system structure. And there was one more thing I was going to mention around groups, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavour. We certainly have not forgotten them, and they're very much part of what we're developing at the moment. Those things, I think I was just going to mention that there'll be some things that are set at regulation level for how they meet what's needed within a group operating system or operating plan, and then there will be some things that notice. So you will see some things come out in that August consultation around groups.
Great, because that'll help explain, I think, and give answers to some of the follow-up questions about the amounts that are specified for being to be able to be a part of the group scheme. It was based on a sales of 10 or 15 or something. So those things will come out when we have that consultation in August, probably a notice content area, I
Absolutely.
presume.
Yeah.
Great. There's another question here from Claire Bleakley asking about GE. It's the first question about why there's no interpretation in the standards on one of the genetic engineering, gene editing, gene technology definitions. This is obviously GE is front and mind for us because the government is potentially changing the legal structure around genetic engineering, and our standard or our regulation is tied to the Has-No Act. And so there's a little bit of I would say questioning as to how that might be impacting the current regulation as it's written that doesn't have these definitions. If you could just share possibly some information about that. And
I'm just trying to recall exactly how that has landed. It might become clearer. I think there will be some content in the notice level, or maybe not. It might not be clearer until the regulation comes out as to where that's landed. I think all I could probably say at this point, Tiff, if I can, and look, if there are any OSAT members on the call that want to chip in, because I can't, because that sort of area is a bit legal privilege because it's in at the regulation level. I mean, I think that OSAT members were pretty comfortable with that when we shared where that has landed within the regulations with the feedback on consultation. I know because I was part of a couple of calls around how that was going to be described when we were sort of putting those proposals up around the national organic standard. I know that the sector is really very keen to make sure that that's described properly in regulation. I mean, I think that's all I can really say at this stage, is that I think the sector sector representatives on that were pretty comfortable with where it had landed.
Yeah,
And given
I
the
know in our submission from
specificity,
OANS, we had a list of what was not allowed in organics, which covered quite a few different GM, GE, pretty much everything kind of in that scope. And because we were able to sort of fall back on that list, it gives us the validation that none of this is allowed in organic production, versus creating specific definitions that we know that legal wasn't quite wanting to put into the regulation. And there'll be lots of reasons for that, but I think that fallback position that we submitted on was something that has come through. We'll see when we get a little bit closer look at what that looks like. But
and happy to, given the
it's
specificity in there, happy to take that away and just see if we can provide a little bit back. We'll see what we can.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. Another question from John Clements was, does the timeline apply to new treaty equivalency arrangements for traditional primary production?
Sorry, could you just repeat that?
I think with the EU equivalency, perhaps John is asking about the timeline about
other
organic, treaty obligations and equivalency about organics and everything else that was negotiated within the EU negotiation. John, are you still on the line? If you want to perhaps give us a little more detail on what you're thinking.
No, it's really in terms of the free trade agreement with the EU, will the same standards, will traditional agriculture have similar kind of standards as opposed to organics? Organics is obviously a niche within it, but is the traditional agriculture got some similar standards that they have to comply to?
I actually don't think that we can comment on that, John. Again, we can probably take that away. I think that's a question on traditional agriculture rather than the organic standard.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. I think we would need to take that away and understand better from colleagues.
Thanks.
Yep. Good question, John. Let's follow that up. And ask some of the colleagues. It'd be great to hear from the people that help negotiate that free trade agreement and what some of those timelines are on equivalency for other sectors. And just because we're running out of time, one last question. Marion Thompson is asking how long the public consultation process will be. So we're
That'll be,
thinking-
oh, sorry.
No, I was thinking if we're starting in August, at some point, what, is it 2 weeks?
Aiming for 4 weeks.
4 weeks. Okay, great. 4 weeks. So there's other questions here.
But if it feels like everything's crunching down in its material, we may need to shrink that slightly, but the goal absolutely will be 4 weeks.
Okay. And we'll help organize things from our end so that the
Thank
sector
you.
is
That'd
well
be great.
prepared and lead conversations and have more webinars like this so we can get everyone involved and discussing the notice content so we can make sure that we have great submissions back for you. Thank you so much to both of you for coming today, for taking time out to help educate us and help the sector learn of all of the good work that's going on behind the scenes. I really appreciate putting together a presentation. We'd love to share that presentation out with everybody. And yeah, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Very excited that you were here. It's great that we had so many people come show up and looking for some more information about the very important development of the standard. So thank you so much. And I wish you all a very, very good day. Thanks.
Thanks. Matawa.
Atewa.
Thank you, Tiff. Thanks, everyone.